So we need to work as best we can in alignment with our chronotype. So there are really simple, achievable things that we can do to live in harmony with our human operating system. But the chief one that I see lots of leaders struggling to do is to reconcile the fact that we are designed for effort and recovery. They are not one or the other. We don't save up our recovery for our annual leave. It has to be baked into our days if we really want to sustain optimal peak performance.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. If you had asked Dr. Kristy Goodwin a few years ago what her calendar looked like, she would have told you it was jam-packed. Back-to-back speaking gigs, research deadlines, a house full of children, and a schedule that ran on caffeine, colour-coded calendars, and sheer momentum. Then came COVID, and like many of us, her world stopped. For the first time in years, she found herself sitting still, really still. No flights, no stage, no endless rush. And what began as a disorientation quickly turned into a revelation. The pace that she had normalized, the digital tethering, the constant stimulation, the glorification of busy, it wasn't just unsustainable, it was toxic. That pause became a turning point because Kristy, who was already a leading researcher in digital health, started to live her own data. She saw up close how high performers, especially leaders, were burning out, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't stop. The result? She shifted her entire focus to helping us rethink success in a digitally demanding world. In this episode of Future Fit Leadership, we go deep with Dr. Kristy Goodwin, one of Australia's leading voices on digital wellbeing, performance and burnout. She is sharp, funny and absolutely uncompromising in her mission to help us lead healthier, more human lives in an age of 24/7 connectivity. She introduces us to a concept that stayed with me: 4,000 Sundays. That is the average number of Sundays we get in a lifetime. Just sit with that for a moment, 4,000. And if you're like most of us, constantly multitasking, always checking, never quite switching off, how many of those Sundays are we really present for? We also unpack what Kristy calls the success tax, the invisible toll leaders pay when they operate in high-stress, high-output environments without boundaries. It's the email at midnight, the back-to-back Zooms with no bio break, the praise we give for showing up when somebody clearly should be slowing down. It's that badge of honour that is quietly burning us out. And then there's brain science. Kristy drops a truth bomb that made me want to throw my phone out the window. Just having your phone nearby, even when it's face down, reduces your cognitive capacity. Yep, it actually makes you dumber. Her words, not mine. We're outsourcing our brains to devices that are not designed to care for our well-being. But what makes this conversation so valuable, it's not just diagnosis, it's a roadmap. We explore how leaders can stop talking about well-being and start modelling it, what it looks like to build tech boundaries without becoming a hermit, why your best leadership doesn't come from an always-on mindset, but from protecting your attention like it's gold. Kristy reminds us that the future of leadership isn't just about output. It's about energy, intention, presence. It's about leading like your health and the health of your team depends on it, because it does. So if you're wired, tired, or somewhere in between, this is the conversation you didn't know you needed. Here is the brilliant, bold, and deeply grounded Dr. Kristy Goodwin. Well, hello, Kristy. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. I first met you and saw you at a conference we had recently, and you shared your story and how burnout affected you and how that moment really reshaped your life and how you look at life now. So maybe could you share with our listeners that story that you shared with us?
Yes. So for years, and I think this often happens with many high performers, we hear whispers from our body to slow down, to work at a more sustainable pace, to release the stress valve. And like many people, I ignored those whispers until my body had no other option than to shout at me. So at the height of COVID, like many people, back in the very early stages of COVID, when people were fighting over toilet paper in supermarkets, I contracted COVID. Now, as you heard me share, I expected this to be a really relatively minor incident. I, if I'm really honest, had plans of binge watching Netflix in bed and having my husband deliver me chicken soup. I was a fit, vaccinated woman with no underlying health issues, so I thought it would be a really minor blip on the radar. Little did I know that I would be very seriously affected with COVID, and alongside COVID, I had uncontrollable, repeatable seizures. And our Great Dane, Tommy, found me convulsing next to the bed early one morning and alerted my husband. I was rushed to a code red emergency ward and hooked up to a ventilator, unable to breathe. After extensive
Terrifying.
It was awful and completely unexpected. You know, I naively thought that I'd just spend a few days lying, convalescing in bed, enjoying chicken soup. That did not happen. And after a lot of testing, the only medical explanation that the doctors came up with as to why I was so sick with COVID was that I was also burnt out. You know, years and years of chronic stress that I had disregarded. I had ignored those whispers, had caught up with me. And I often say to people, our bodies keep score. Our bodies do not lie. And one of our harsh constraints as humans is that we cannot outperform our biological blueprint. We have some really rigid constraints as humans. And so I thought I could keep hustling, pushing, grinding my way to success, but my body did not agree with me. And so I lay there in that COVID code red ward hooked up to the ventilator, and I heard the woman in the bed next to me. There was a paper partition curtain separating us in this code red ward. And I tragically heard that woman take the final breath of her life. And if anyone has ever been in the presence of someone when they do and conclude their life, it is a really, really sobering moment. I lay there and was forced to confront my own possible mortality. I lay there thinking, am I going to face the same reality as what this poor woman did next to me? And I lay there and I realized I had almost paid what I see so many high performers pay. I call it a success tax. I see lots of people achieve epic results. You know, they hit their KPIs from an optics perspective. They're achieving all of these great things, accolades, you know, all of the benchmarks of what we would consider success. But it's often they pay a tax, and the tax is usually one of three things. They either pay with their physical health, they pay with their mental well-being, or they pay with compromised relationships, or sadly, sometimes I see the
All three.
which is all three. Absolutely. And so I lay there in that bed and I made myself a promise that if I left that hospital, I was going to start living and working in ways that were compatible with what I call our human operating system. This is how we are designed as humans. Our brain and our body have those biological constraints that I mentioned before. And I recognized that years and years I'd been living and working in ways that were completely unsustainable, hence why I that burnout. So I was lucky. I recognized that I was one of the privileged ones who did leave a code red ward. And since then, I completely overhauled my life. I started managing my stress. I started looking at recovery as an absolutely integral part of sustainable performance. And I'm pleased to say that, yes, that was the catalyst for me to say, I'm no longer willing to pay a success tax. I'm going to start living and working in harmony with my human operating system, which is what I've done.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts around this issue of the success tax, where post-COVID in particular, there was a lot of leaders who managed COVID through businesses, which was a very stressful time. And then we kind of hit the pedal after COVID when businesses opened up and travel opened up again. And a lot of leaders just didn't stop, and there was significant burnout. But yet we still see such an emphasis put on having a high achieving workplace, having high achieving results. People are still questioning a hybrid workplace. If a CEO decided to go down to 4 days a week, they would be questioned. Why aren't we learning the lessons?
I completely agree. And the data is corroborating exactly what you've described. We did see rates of burnout amongst the COVID years high, but what's terrifying is that often those high rates haven't dropped significantly. We are seeing sometimes even an increase in rates of stress, exhaustion, and burnout. And I agree, where leaders are facing a monumental surge in change happening all simultaneously. Different plans in work models, the integration and implementation of radically new and constantly evolving digital technologies. We are seeing a growing recognition, particularly of mental health requirements of employees and teams. I sometimes call it almost like a stress superstorm. There are all of these things happening simultaneously, and the demands and expectations on leaders are higher than they've ever been. And so I think we're seeing these unprecedented changes and challenges. And at the same time, I agree, I don't think we ever really recovered from the demands and the huge expectations placed on leaders during those difficult years navigating COVID. So I think it's almost a recipe, and we're seeing it. Study after study in the last 3 years is telling us that rates of stress, exhaustion, and burnout are still alarmingly high, and in some demographics it's even increasing. For example, we know it is very pronounced. We're seeing something I'm very passionate about addressing is a gender wellbeing gap. Significantly and alarmingly more women than men are experiencing stress and burnout. And so we need to remedy this for all people, not just for females, but it is a universal issue because businesses thrive when their people thrive.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
If the people leading them, Deloitte came up with a beautiful term a couple of years ago. They talked about investing in human capital. And it's a very economic lens to put on what we all intrinsically know. And that is that we really do have to invest in people, and our leaders really need to be able to flourish in this turbulent, constantly changing and always on digital world that we've all inherited.
One of the things you spoke about at the conference that I saw you speak at, which was a real aha moment for a lot of people in the room, was how many Sundays we get in a lifetime and possibly how many Sundays we have left. So, I think if we looked at our workplaces and the amount of stress we're under and how that's impacting our body, we will reduce the number of Sundays that we have left if we don't do something about it. So maybe share with us how you actually shared it with us on stage that day.
And thank you for sharing that resonated. I overwhelmingly get lots of DMs and emails from people saying that was confronting to hear, and I do acknowledge that, but it's also something that sticks with people. And it's based on a fabulous book written by Oliver Burkeman called 4,000 Weeks. And it's based on the premise that most humans on average have a life expectancy of around 80 years, which equates to roughly 4,000 weeks. I thought 4,000 weeks almost sounds too macro. We don't really get the granular picture of what that means, hence why I coined the term 4,000 Sundays. If you get 4,000 weeks, you get 4,000 Sundays. And as you said, when we compromise our physical health, when we sacrifice our mental well-being, it means that we may not get those 4,000 Sundays because we're shrinking our life expectancy. But also, I work with many high performers who may not sacrifice their physical health, but what they are sacrificing is their energy and their relationships. And they are living as what I call low-res, powered down, burnt out versions of themselves. They get to, let's be honest, they crawl to Friday, they creep over the finish line on Saturday, and if they're working in industries where they're required to work on a Saturday, and then their Sundays are spent not making the most of that precious time that we've got. And I think many of us, we get caught up in this frantic, frenetic, frazzled world that we now live in, and we forget that our time is finite. And It's not until you have a life-changing moment like I did in that hospital, like many people do, when it's a health crisis, when it's a serious relationship breakdown, that we really start to reconcile that harsh fact that our time as humans is finite. And so I use that 4,000 Sundays just to remind us that we have to make sure that we're maximizing, firstly, how many Sundays we have left, but also at the same time, making sure that we're making the most of those Sundays, that we're living, as I call it, a high-res, powered-up version of ourselves, so we can not crawl to Sunday. We can actually get to Sunday feeling invigorated, energized, and making the most of this precious time that we've been gifted.
I can just imagine everyone listening to this working out how many Sundays they have left right now. You mentioned earlier the human operating system, which I love. You've said that we can't outperform it. From a neurobiology perspective, we just can't outperform it. So how do we work in ways that helps us support our human operating system?
Yes, so I often say we unfortunately have ancient Paleolithic brains. We have brains that were biologically designed to go and forage, hunt, and get information, and at a time, at a cadence, and at a volume that suited us. So we used to go and borrow books, get encyclopedias. We used to phone somebody to make an appointment. We are not, and our brains have not evolved to cope with a huge volume of information. It is estimated the average adult processes a whopping 74 gigabytes worth of information every single day. That is more than our ancestors consumed in an entire lifetime. So our technologies are evolving, but our human operating system isn't evolving at the same pace. We are not designed to be always on. So many of us, because of mobile technologies, because of changing expectations in terms of workloads, many of us now feel like we need to be instantly responsive. And I colloquially call these, we've adopted some really unhealthy tech expectations. And this is why it's absolutely imperative. One of the things I implore leaders to consider in their organizations is, have you created digital guardrails? These are the digital norms, practices, and principles that are often unspoken. They are the tech expectations, and that's a colloquial term, but some of the practices that we put in place to help take back control and make sure that we are not feeling like we need to be always on. It also, I want to point out, a legal obligation, especially if your listeners are in Australia, around the right to disconnect legislation that we have. So how do we live and work in harmony with our human operating system? We have to be better at managing stress. An inevitable reality in our digitally demanding, modern, always-on worlds is that we experience stress. How do we manage? How do we develop our tolerance for stress? How to become resilient to stress? I think we have to, for example, we know we are designed to work and recover. We're not designed to sit down at our desks and pump out a 14-hour day. I often say that the part of our brain that does our heavy lifting, the prefrontal cortex, only has a 4 to 6 hour battery life per day. Now, that's not to suggest, and sometimes people misconstrue this, I'm not saying that you should have a 4 to 6 hour workday, although we would like that. To do the mentally challenging, cognitively demanding, taxing work, we only really have that 4 to 6 hour battery life per day. So we are designed to work and then recover, work and then recover. We are designed so that we have some areas of times of the day when we're naturally more focused and alert. This is based on something called your chronotype, which dictates when your focus is at its prime and when it's possibly less optimal. So we need to work as best we can in alignment with our chronotype. So there are really simple, achievable things that we can do to live in harmony with our human operating system. But the chief one that I see lots of leaders struggling to do is to reconcile the fact that we are designed for effort and recovery. They are not one or the other. We don't save up our recovery for our annual leave. It has to be baked into our days if we really want to sustain optimal peak performance.
Bit like what they do in Europe, don't they? They go home for an afternoon nap. I mean, why aren't we doing that everywhere?
Well, do you know, I think a lot of it has to do, I think we have taken the industrialized model of productivity, that the number of hours that, when we used to Bundy on and Bundy off, that the number of hours we work was equivalent to our productivity. For most people today, particularly in the world we now live in, many people are knowledge workers. So we are not paid for, we are paid for outcomes and
not the
output.
Hours.
Not ours. And I think that's a quantum shift in our thinking. And so this is why I think we need leaders more than anyone understanding the merits of recovery. And I often share that when we take breaks, when we actually have some downtime, so neuroscientists call it the default mode network. And what this basically means is that when our brains have time, I call it meandering, when our mind has time to meander, we used to call it daydreaming. But when we have that downtime, we often come up with creative solutions. We solve complex problems. Our ideation skyrockets. This is when ideas percolate. And I often ask, I don't know if I asked this in the conference where you heard me speak, but I often say to people, where were you? What were you doing when your last great idea germinated? And most people say it's in the shower.
In the shower.
Yep, it's driving. It
Yep.
used to be when we used to have planes without Wi-Fi, it used to be on a plane. And often that is a biological reason. When things move past our eyes, it creates something called optic flow. So things, shower, when we're driving, walking is another one. Being in water is often very common for people to have these ideas land. Optic flow quietens down part of the brain called the amygdala. And that's often what we associate with the worry center or the emotional regulation part of the brain. That opportunity to let your mind meander is often absolutely critical for ideation and creativity. And we have to see that as a performance protocol. If we were really taking breaks, yes, is essential to sustain well-being. But if we want to drive high performance, if we want to ideate, if we want to innovate, then we also need to see the merits. And thank goodness, Gartner actually did some research to quantify this. And we know that if people take proactive recovery, they are 26% more productive.
That's amazing. That's a lot.
It is huge. But again, it's a quantum shift in many leaders' thinking because we, I think, have become conditioned to assuming that the number of hours we work equates to our productivity. Yeah. There is, something called the law of diminishing returns. We almost have a threshold. And once we get to that point, past that, and we all know that, the day where we just pump through and we do a 16-hour day, we know that from probably about hour 9, the quality of our output is far inferior.
And I think that's the biggest shift leaders are going to have to, face and adjust their thinking around. So I interviewed a very young leader on this podcast a couple of weeks ago. He's only in his 20s, and he comes from the mindset of, yes, I'm going to pay you to do 40 hours a week or 38 hours a week, whatever that looks like in my business. But if you finish your work at lunchtime and you genuinely have nothing else to do and you can't help anybody else in the business do what they need to do, then go home. And it's so refreshing, whereas there is a cohort of leaders who still have that mindset of, no, I pay you to do 7.5 hours of work a day and more if you need to. And if you're not in the office, why should I be paying you? If your bum isn't in the chair, then you can't be doing the work. And I think that is going to be the most significant shift around leadership. And more people want to choose to work with the younger type of leader with that attitude than another type of leader.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that what you just shared illustrates that we can have well-being policies in workplaces. We can have all sorts of apps and well-being initiatives. Some research was published a couple of weeks ago that tells us the biggest driver of organizational well-being across employees is leaders walking the talk. When your leader genuinely invests in their own well-being, when they value it, when they cultivate it, it has a contagion effect on their employees. And so I would imagine that this particular leader that you interviewed is probably, and if they're not already, will eventually see some huge cascading consequences from their decision to implement that and hopefully model it themselves. Because, sustainable success is really about investing in your people, and we need leaders leading from the front.
Now, you talked about chronotypes. It's something I came across when I purchased an Aura ring. So one of the wearables that, tells me how I sleep and my heart rate and my exercise. Now I'm addicted to it. But it was an interesting thing. It is a good addiction. And it took a while for my body to map back to the right chronotype that I'm supposedly at. Explain to people who may not understand what a chronotype is and why it's so important to be aligned to it.
So your chronotype is biologically determined. It's part of your human operating system, and it dictates two really fundamental things. It dictates what time or times of the day you are naturally most focused and alert. So I call these your peak performance window. It also dictates when you ideally, naturally, biologically should fall asleep and wake up. And so generally speaking, there's some conjecture in the research at the moment, but generally speaking, we fall into one of three buckets or categories. We've got the early birds, or they're sometimes called lions, and these are the people that naturally wake up early and they are the most productive. These are the people in the office at 7 a.m. They've already pumped out an hour and a half worth of work. They've done their gym workout and they're slurping their green smoothie as the rest of the office staff walk in. Statistically, most people are what we call bears, and their peak performance window, that focus zone, is usually between 10 a.m. and roughly 2 p.m. So the traditional workday, if anyone ever had a traditional workday, the traditional workday worked okay for them. And then we have an even smaller cohort of people who are your owls or your wolves, they're sometimes called. And these are the night people. These are your colleagues who are emailing you at 11 o'clock at night. These are the people who cringe when they get an 8 o'clock meeting invitation. And so the trick, and this is what I think is one of the many silver linings of the pandemic and the more flexible work arrangements that we have, and I recognize it's a privilege for not all occupations and for not all people, but for many people, particularly knowledge workers, when you can structure the contours and the cadence of your day to map your chronotype, you can get more work done. And so this is about working smarter so you can work harder and not burn out. I think it's often a social media slogan, work smart, not hard.
Not hard.
No, you need to, I actually think you can do both, but the trick for sustaining that hard work is by working smarter, so you're not going to exhaust and burn yourself out, because you'll work with your human operating system. And so
how do you work out what your chronotype is if you don't have a wearable?
So if you don't have a wearable, the simplest form, I say to people, when you go on your holidays, and I usually say by about day 3 or 4, once you've had time to decompress, sometimes for many higher performers, the first couple of days of their holidays is often wiped out with illness, migraine, sickness. That is because when you have heightened levels of stress before you take your annual leave, because you're trying to triage your to-do list, you're trying to get on top of everything, let alone pack and manage all the logistics if you're going away, we often have heightened stress. And so once we stop that stress, that's when our immunity is often compromised, and that's when we get sick. It's not when we're in the heightened stress, it's when we actually decompress. So what I say to people, once you've had sort of a few days to recalibrate, when do you naturally fall asleep and when do you naturally wake up without the demands of being at a meeting on time, or if you've got children, getting them prepared for school? When do you naturally fall asleep and wake up? And most of us instinctively know what our chronotype is. Another question I often get asked is, if I'm a particular chronotype, but I'd like to be another one. And I often hear this from the wolves, the night people. They say, look, I'm a wolf, but society's really not set up for me. My friends don't like going to the cinemas at 9 o'clock. My colleagues get angry because I'm emailing at midnight and they're not. Unfortunately, you can't manipulate or shift your chronotype, but your chronotype does change throughout your lifespan. So you can't change it out of your own desire. Yes, but it does tend to shift. But the trick is, if you can, and you don't have to be perfect at this, but where possible, if you can identify your peak performance window, are you more productive and focused and alert? And we all instinctively sort of know what we are. Can you build a fortress around your focus during that peak performance window? Because a study from McKinsey & Co found that most people only spend 5% of their work week doing their most challenging work in their most productive hours. That's a really sobering statistic. Yeah. They bumped that up to just 20%. So the equivalent of having one full day a week where you did your most productive work in your most productive hours. What resulted by just having that 20% time doing the mapping of those two things was a 55% increase in productivity. And so this is a prime example of when we work with our human operating system rather than against it, we are more productive, hence why we can work smarter and harder and not burn out in the process.
It's interesting, I read a few years ago, I don't know if this is correct or not, but the reading that I did said that the human body is designed to wake up naturally when the sun comes up. Yeah. So when light hits your room, etc. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. So I stopped putting an alarm on and The first few times I think I did sleep in because for whatever reason, but I find now, unless I have a super early morning meeting that I know I need to be up for and out the house by, 7 a.m. in the morning, etc., I usually don't set an alarm anymore, and I naturally wake up every morning between 6 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. And I've been doing that for years now. And because that alarm, particularly if you're in a deep sleep and it goes off, it's like a bomb going off in your head.
And the reason is if you have an alarm and you are oscillating, if you do wear a wearable, you can usually see the stages of your sleep. If you are in deep or even worse REM sleep, which is when you're dreaming and the alarm goes off, it is jarring because you have an incomplete sleep cycle. So as adults, we should, in an ideal world, have between 4 and 6 completed sleep cycles every single night. But if you're halfway between stages, perhaps if you're lucky 5 and 6, and that alarm is blasting, firstly, it's a really psychologically stressful way to wake up with some sort of noise that is really putting your nervous system in a very dysregulated state. And that's the first thing that happens in your day. The second thing I want to point out, by naturally waking up with sun, and that is a brilliant way if you can and get your biology set up, the fact that you are waking up between 6 and 6:30 every single day is something really important. Some pioneering new research that has just recently been published tells us that if we can go to sleep and wake up at around the same time, so plus or minus 30 minutes every day, sleep consistency, we think is potentially a better predictor of our all-cause mortality than how many hours of sleep we're getting. Now, I don't want people to misconstrue this. I'm not saying you can get away with 3 hours of sleep. We still think we need somewhere between sort of 7 to maybe 9 hours per night for adults. But we also know that having that predictability, it basically sets up all of your biological rhythms when you go to sleep and wake up within a relatively consistent period of time. And that's obviously what you're doing in terms of setting up your biology that way.
Well, that's good to hear that I'm actually doing something positive for my body as opposed to something negative, considering all the other stuff that I don't do. Let's talk about the focus quotient. Have I pronounced that correctly? Yes. Or FQ, as you call it. You've called it the super skill of the 21st century. Why is it more important now than IQ or EQ?
Yes. So we are living in a world that has been designed to be distracting and disruptive. Remember I said earlier, we've got these ancient Paleolithic brains. Our brains were designed to go and forage and hunt and get information, not to have unsolicited things constantly vying for our attention. Our brain cannot physiologically, it can psychologically, but when we get an alert, a notification, a ping, an email reminder, a vibration on our smartwatch, our brain says, potential stressor or danger. I better go and respond and react. And this makes us often very stressed, and it has a huge impact on dysregulating our nervous system. So we are simply not designed to be distracted. And we often say to people, we intuitively know this. I often, in my keynotes, say to people, when you're driving in the car and you're going to a totally unfamiliar destination, if the radio's on, if there's a podcast playing or an audio book, what do you instinctively do when you need to focus?
Turn it down.
Turn it down. And so we intuitively know as humans that when we need to focus, we have to eliminate as many distractions as possible. But we have, I think, evolved to think that we are designed to be distracted, designed to multitask, irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your age. One of our biological constraints as humans, one of our limitations of our HOS, is that we cannot multitask. We are designed to monotask and being constantly distracted. And we know many people are sitting in virtual meetings and they're
the email pinging.
Their emails. Absolutely. We know most people today, are much to advertisers' displeasure, are watching television and they're multi-screening at the same time. They've either got a laptop or their phone or their tablet on their lap simultaneously. And we know when we are multitasking, from a brain perspective, our brain burns through glucose, which is the energy supply, because we are rapidly task switching. We're actually never, ever simultaneously doing two things at once. We are constantly switching and oscillating between tasks. The other thing that happens is we release cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone when we multitask because our brain isn't designed for it. But the most fascinating thing they've discovered in recent years is that when we multitask, instead of activating part of the brain, it's called the the hippocampus. Wrong age. Hippocampus is our memory center. It's our hard drive. Instead of activating our hippocampus when we are multitasking, we activate part of the brain called the striatum. The striatum does not help us with long-term memory retrieval. The hippocampus does. So multitasking, put simply, is not productive, and it is not how our human operating system is designed. So being able to manage our focus, as you said, I call it our FQ, is by far more important than our IQ and EQ in 2025 and beyond.
You know, as you've been talking to me, so we've been chatting for about half an hour or so, and all the things that we've been talking about and everything that we're doing to our brains now to what we were doing to our brains 100 years ago, they're exhausted. We're actually exhausting our brains to the point where we're probably having poor recall of memory. It's constantly tired. I can't even imagine how it actually really feels. If you could tell us, it'd probably stop us itself.
It would. It'd raise a red flag.
Yeah.
Time out, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you've picked up on there is that we are living and working. And let's be honest, the two have become enmeshed together in recent times. We are living and working in ways that are completely incompatible with our human operating system. You know, for example, we are more sedentary than we have ever been as a human species. Our brain is designed for movement. When we move, we make brain-derived nootropic factors. They're called BDNFs. And we make a whole lot of things like dopamine and serotonin. These are things that make us feel good and help us to focus. I often share even the way that we breathe is changed just by the simple act of us looking at a screen. When our eyes converge on our phones or our laptops or desktops, that very small gaze or that narrow surface area when our eyes look at a screen triggers the stress response, because as humans, we are biologically designed for our eyes to look in the distance, you know, to stare at the woolly mammoth on the horizon. And so when we look at a small screen, that stress response is activated, and what results as an effect is that we do not sigh anywhere near as much. And so one of the reasons that we are so exhausted, one of the reasons that we're seeing this increase in stress and burnout is because we are not dropping back to a stress baseline. I often say it's like an assault of tiny little micro stresses in our days, you know, the pings and dings going from one virtual meeting to the next, coupled with the fact that we're not coming back to a stress baseline anymore. So we are in this heightened state of stress. And what we know is that when we're on this small surface area, we do not sigh anywhere near as much. Now, as humans, part of our human operating system is that we are designed to sigh roughly every 5 minutes whilst we're awake. It's a natural mechanism to regulate our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels and bring us back to that stress baseline. But we do not do this. And this has been studied in a condition called email apnea. When people go into their inboxes, they hold their breath, they dump a whole lot of cortisol, their heart rate accelerates, their pupils dilate. And so we are having these profound physiological and psychological changes because we are living and working in ways that are not compatible with this human operating system.
Okay. So so with all the distractions that we have, so whether I'm sitting there watching Netflix, flicking through my phone, or I'm sitting at the office and I'm distracted digitally, and I think you've quoted we lose up to 600 hours per employee due to the distractions that we have.
Yep.
How do we consciously start to change our habits around this, whether it's at home or at work?
Yeah. So first and foremost, and I acknowledge this one sounds simple, but really hard to execute in practice, is that when we want to be focused, when we want to be present in the meeting, when we want to have dinner with our partner without, our phones pinging, put your phone somewhere where you cannot see it or hear it. Research tells us that even if our phone is on silent and face down, if it's in our line of sight, it drops our cognitive performance by an estimated 7 to 10%. So put bluntly, seeing your phone makes
Put your phone away.
% dumber. It is literally a brain drain.
Yeah.
So put it out of sight. I also have 3 golden rules when it comes to notifications. So rule number 1, disable non-urgent notifications. Most notifications you don't need unless you're managing social media, which I wouldn't imagine is the case for many leaders. I challenge any leader who tells me they need email notifications. We don't.
No, we don't. I've actually stopped all of mine. I don't get any note unless I choose to go and have a look at it.
Yeah, perfect. So turn off non-essential notifications. Rule number 2 is that if you do need some notifications, bundle or batch them. So you can now on WhatsApp, on Teams, on all of the social media platforms, you can now nominate what time or times of the day you want notifications coming to you, rather than them dribbling in and distracting you. And the reason that this is so important is that regardless of how we're distracted, whether it's our phone vibrating, whether it's the ping of an email dancing across, the alert that used to dance across our screen and then go off. Yeah, whether it's in the office, we can't forget that our colleagues can be distracting. Whether it's a ruminating thought, regardless of how we are distracted, it takes the average adult 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back into a focused state. It's called the resumption lag. Now, I'm not saying it takes us 23 minutes to start the task again, but for us to be in that really focused state, it takes around 23 minutes. Imagine what distractions
how much time we lose.
Huge. It's estimated 180 hours per Australian employees lost just in the resumption lag. So that lag time of getting back into that focused state. And my third rule, so number one, we've turned off the non-essentials. Number two, we've bundled or batched them. Number three is, if you do need to have notifications, create VIP lists. Yeah. So are you working on a client with a time-sensitive request? Is there a legal team and there is information? Do you have aging parents? Do you have young children? If you're a leader, is it your EA or PA who does need to get through to you? What this does is give us that psychological respite of knowing that everyone, the rest of the world gets blocked apart from those people on that VIP list. And so there are tangible, pragmatic things that we can do. The chief thing, if we circle back, is knowing when your chronotype's peak performance window is, and that's the time we just have to be so fierce on building that fortress around the focus then, because that's prime real estate.
What are your thoughts on the digital detoxes we see happen all the time? Like, I don't know how many times I've seen in social media people saying, well, I'm putting my phone away for the weekend, or I'm tuning out for the week, or I'm not checking my Facebook for the month. What are your thoughts on that? Because I would assume you just go back to old habits anyway when you turn it back on.
Yeah, exactly like juice cleansers or any sort of detox that we do. The research actually tells us that digital detoxes create what we call a binge and then a purge cycle. So we go offline for a couple of days, as you said, but we come back on Monday morning and we've got a swollen inbox. We're triaging our DMs. What we know is that, yes, we do need time to unplug. That mind meandering mode that I talked about before, we need time to switch off. But doing a hardcore detox doesn't actually cause long-term behavioral change. A study was done a couple of years ago and they had one group do a digital detox and they had another group just reduce their social media use by 15 minutes a day. They concluded the study and both groups saw a reduction in their time online and increase in their mental health. They went back after about 6 months and reevaluated. The group that did the digital detox had reverted back to their pre-detox habits. The group that had cut their time down by 15 minutes had sustained their reduced usage over time. So if we want to make long-term changes, we have to get to the root of what's driving the behavior. But I certainly agree that we do need some time where we digitally disconnect. I'm just not an advocate for detoxes and switching off. It's also something I often say to people, it's a very privileged position. If you can legitimately switch off without anyone requiring or needing you for a sustained period of time, something that's often achievable for a lot of people.
No. What about working parents? Because they have the stresses at work and then they come home to a different type of chaos. How can they get the rest that they need from work, pinging them, to kids' sports, to getting them ready to go back to school and everything else that happens in between?
Yes. I'm in the trenches here.
You are?
I have 3 sons from 14 down to 6. So I hear you. And this is where some of the newest research is coming out. And I mentioned it at the start of this podcast. We have this growing disparity between female and male well-being. They're calling it the gender well-being gap. And some new research published last year in 2024 tells us that women, because they tend to absorb still a lot of the caring and domestic responsibilities in most heterosexual relationships, what now comes with that is what they're referring to as the double digital burden. So they are often by default the person in the sports WhatsApp group. They are the person getting the emails and the text messages and the plethora of digital requests online from the school or from childcare or with aging parents. And so this is a really pronounced problem, especially for females, but for all parents in general. This is where you need to come up with what I call your personal digital guardrails. For me, I've 3 kids who play a lot of sport. That means I'm in far too many parental WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
A minefield to begin with. So I bundle those notifications. And so they come through at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And if I think there could be, if it's raining and I'm not sure if training is going to be cancelled, then I can go in and obviously check. But coming up with some of those parameters, because being always on, being always responsive is going to totally dysregulate your nervous system and completely exhaust and deplete you. So coming up with some of those boundaries can make a huge difference. Switching your phone off so it's on silent and having an automated message go to people, an automated text message, so they know you're not ignoring them. And there's a way, if they ring twice, they will get through that do not disturb mode. So there are certainly things that we can put in place to make that more tangible, but such a pronounced problem for many people, particularly parents.
I think we all feel we're saving lives sometimes every day, that we have to be always on and always available, which is really not the case at all. You talk a lot about...
Can I just explain
Yeah.
what? Because we've got to remember these ancient brains. And so
Yeah.
when something unsolicited comes to us, our brain says, hang on, this could be a tiger chasing me, or this could be a threat or a danger. I better respond. The fact that by default, most of our notification bubbles are red. Red we associate with danger, urgency, importance. The fact that there's often a number, for me, I know I've got that awful number declaring how many unread emails or WhatsApp messages or text messages you've got. We have something as humans called the completion bias. So we love seeing, this is why we love scrubbing things off our to-do list. We want to see that get down to 0. So if I can see I've got 22 unread text messages, I often feel implored to go and triage them.
You talk about a 3-part strategy day to day for managing stress, building tolerance for it, and learning to recover. What are those 3 things?
I coined something called the flourishing formula. And I believe that if people want to thrive, if they want to flourish in this digitally demanding world we've all now inherited, there are 3 pillars. The first pillar is building our stress adaptability. So for want of a better word, I often say we need to learn to dance with stress. We've got to build our tolerance to stress. We've got to build our resilience to stress. And we've got to eliminate those little micro stresses, alerts and notifications, those things that seem relatively harmless, but are actually cumulatively making us stress. So really trying to build that adaptability so that we can dance with stress. Stress gets a bad rap. Unfortunately, it shouldn't. We now know that stress can actually catalyze our performance. Just a few weeks ago, a study was published with surgeons telling us that if surgeon encounters a stressful event within the first 5 minutes of a procedure, the client has far better outcomes than if they hadn't had that stressful response.
Wow.
So what does stress do? It helps us to catalyze our energy. We have laser focus. We shut off our peripheral vision. Yes, we get an accelerated heart rate, but that's helping us to think in a really critical way. We can't sustain that for huge periods of time. And this is where I see a lot of leaders come undone because they're in this chronically elevated stress. So building that adaptability around stress and learning to dance with it, absolutely imperative. The second pillar that we talked about earlier is about building that FQ, building your capacity to focus in a world that is going to increasingly become more disruptive, more distracting. And the third pillar is around reframing recovery. We have to stop seeing recovery as something frivolous, something that we will eventually get round to. I often coin this term called recovery is your peak performance pit stop. So a bit like race cars take pit stops so that race car doesn't crawl to the finish line, that race car finishes the race in an optimal state. That's how we need to see rest, that if we want to sustain that peak performance, then we have to invest in our rest.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the cold shower trend that everybody tells me I need to do, which is...
That you don't want to do.
I don't want to do. I don't want to stand down in the cold shower for 30 seconds in the morning before I get out. Like that just seem, but they seem to say that it's strengthening your ability to cope with stress. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, your friends and some of the social media influencers are right.
No, I'm still not going to do it.
It's all right. I like your honesty. Look, the reason that, and I will say some really new research just in the last week or so has come out saying that there are some differences in terms of females and males' tolerance to cold exposure, particularly for menstruating women during particular phases of their cycle. They are much more prone to experiencing cold more than their male counterparts. What we know is that we need to develop our tolerance to stress. When I talked before about building this adaptability, one of the problems that means that many, particularly leaders and managers, we are seeing this, rates of burnout and exhaustion amongst managers as well is really high at the moment because they're stretched in a myriad of directions. We are living in a world of instant gratification. We are living in a world where we very rarely today experience physical discomfort. And when we become as humans intolerant to experience physical stress, we are often incapable of tolerating psychological stress. And so we have to be more intentional than ever as humans to seek challenge over comfort. And so what we know is that cold showers, ice baths, saunas can have, maybe you don't like the cold, but deliberate heat exposure. There you go. That can have huge benefits too. Basically, when we do hard things, part of the brain, it's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. For want of a better word, this is the willpower center of the brain. This part of the brain can become physically larger when we do hard things. And so when we put ourselves in discomfort, physical discomfort, we develop that part of the brain. A study recently published showed us that the anterior mid-cingulate cortex is larger in athletes, smaller in obese people, meaning that we can develop that tolerance to stress. We can train willpower. So 30 to 60-second cold shower, and cold exposure, I believe, should only ever be performed in the morning or earlier parts of the day. You actually want to have a bath or a sauna or a shower towards the end of the day before you go to sleep. But in the morning, a 30 to 60-second cold shower, and you can have your warm shower, wash your hair, wash your body, enjoy the beautiful warm shower. And then when you're brave enough to turn the dial around to the cold section, 30 to 60 seconds will give you between a 250 to 500% increase in dopamine, noradrenaline, and norepinephrine. They are fancy words that help you do the 2 Fs. They help you to focus and they help you to feel good. Now, you don't feel good. I'll be really honest. You do not feel good in the shower. You get that euphoric feeling. You get those 2 Fs when you're out of the shower and got your towel wrapped around you. I haven't convinced you still. So
I'm just sitting here thinking I'll try it once and see how I go. Try
for 5 seconds. Certainly don't aim for 30 seconds right up. 5 seconds, see how you go. But anything that you can do, maybe it's the sauna, maybe it's vigorous physical activity. So long as you are doing something that is hard, that will help you develop that tolerance.
So you've worked out how many Sundays you have left out of the 4,000 or so that we are given. Fast forward to your 80th birthday. What would your future self thank you for today?
For making that, I get emotional thinking about it. I actually go back to that hospital ward, hooked up to the ventilator, and for not only making the pledge, sorry, it's actually really quite emotional, for making that pledge to prioritize my health and well-being and then actually living it. My life, it's 5 years ago, almost, since this incident occurred. My life is radically different in 5 years by really prioritizing my health and well-being. My productivity hasn't taken a knock. If anything, it's skyrocketed. And it is honestly just a quantumly different way of thinking and living. I'm proud of making that decision back in that bed and then after.
Well, I'm very glad that you did and you are here with us because, you've got a young family and everything else. But, it's such a come to Jesus moment without sort of, like at that point in time where you sort of think all the things that you have done have led you to a certain point where you have actually no control over. And I mean, I was, many of us listening to this were blessed to say we never got to that point that you did, and, you got through it, but many people didn't either, and they passed away without their family holding their hand. You would not have had your family in there either, and it would have been the most frightening, horrendous time in your life. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Right. It really was a sobering reminder that we all face, we're gifted 4,000 Sundays if we're lucky, and none of us know what's around the corner. And so I just implore people, make the most, live the best life that you can. Please don't wait till it's too late. And I see too many people waiting till it's too late or just living that low res version of themselves.
Yeah. So we've come to a point where we ask us 4 standard questions of all of our guests. And I'll start with what you see as how you would describe a future fit leader in just 3 words, the kind of leader we'll need most in the years ahead. What would they be in 3 words and why?
I'm going to draw on two of my pillars from the flourishing formula. A future fit leader will most certainly be adaptable to change, adaptable to stress, adaptable to the demands that we don't even know. I don't think we can even fathom the change that we're going to see in the next few years. So I think it's a buzzword, but adaptability, but I'm really going to strengthen that stress adaptability. The world is not going to become, I don't think, I'm not a futurist, but it's not going to become any less volatile. The technology, the rate of adoption and change isn't going to slow down. So we have to be adaptable. We have to cultivate that FQ. That's the second one. Like, as leaders, you need to orient, control, and direct your focus. Direct your own personal focus, but also, just as importantly, direct the focus of the leaders in your team and your employees. Your organization's success really hinges on your capacity to focus and block out the superfluous. And the third one that I think is a little bit different, I think we need to focus on leaders being healthy. As I mentioned before, we are seeing, thankfully, a huge resurgence and interest in acknowledging that employee and workplace wellbeing is critical. I think we've gone past the point of it just being a buzzword or a lunch and learn topic or a mental health day once a year. It's absolutely critical. And some research was published last year that actually showed us the top ASX listed companies in the world and the corresponding productivity and output growth when they invested in wellbeing. So there's a nexus between wellbeing and productivity and performance. So I think really prioritizing, in particular, leaders' health and wellbeing is critical.
What's one future shift coming in the next few years that you think most leaders are underestimating or not prepared for?
I don't think they're underestimating this one, but I certainly see them being unprepared. EY just published a paper a few weeks ago saying we're seeing something called AI fatigue. The rapid, prolific rate of digital change is something I don't think we can really genuinely fathom. This exponential growth and rate of change in a whole lot, not just AI, but other digital technologies, is going to be the slowest at the moment in human history. So if we think we're struggling to keep up, if we think the fatigue is rife now, it's possibly going to become even more amplified. Yeah.
What do you wish more leaders were paying closer attention to?
I think creating genuine, sustainable workplaces where your people can thrive. As I said before, when your people thrive, your business thrives. I think there's so much tokenistic, sometimes superficial attention to well-being, and we lead with performance. I think when we can focus on the two together, there's a symbiotic relationship between well-being and performance. When we genuinely invest in our people, regardless of the rate of change of digital technologies, our people will be well placed to take those technologies and run with them.
What are the possibilities or shifts you see in the future of leadership or work that really excites you, and why?
This is a bias, but I am so excited about what I call neurotechnology. So basically technology that works with our brains. And I'm not talking about necessarily headsets or EEG caps. What I'm talking about is marrying and mapping new technologies like AI, like biometric data. So like you, I use wearables. I use a couple because I have clients that use different types, but marrying really personalized, individualized data about our well-being and our performance and really customizing the workplace experience for our people. I think there's huge advances and I think there's huge opportunities, again, to create sustainable, healthy and happy workplaces by using these technologies at our disposal.
If you could embed one leadership quality into every current or future CEO, something you believe will be essential for the next decade, what would it be and why?
That FQ, I can't go past it. It is the super skill, that capacity to control your focus. Attention is a really underrated skill. It's a skill under threat. And that's a skill that I'm really worried is going to become even more pronounced in the coming years with this rapid change and turbulent world we now have inherited.
Kristy, thank you so much for joining us. Now, if people want to find out more about you or connect with you, or what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yes, so I try to share bits of information on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm at Dr. Kristy on Instagram and Dr. Kristy Goodwin on LinkedIn. I also have a digital home, which is my website, which outlines all of the ways that I work with people. I mainly deliver keynotes and offer executive coaching, but using wearable devices. So a rather innovative way to help people really address sustainable wellbeing and performance.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your insights.
Pleasure. Thank you.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast, and don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.